Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legal Karma podcast. I'm your host and founder of Legal Karma, Corey Kelly. This podcast isn't meant to be another legal tech updates podcast. Oh no. During our show, we'll bring on a variety of legal professionals to unpack how they're leveraging tech to scale their social justice work and close the accessibility gap in law. We'll also feature other great tech leaders from the industry who are using their software for good. Because at Legal Karma, we believe tech is poised, and in our opinion, obligated to make an impact. We're glad you're here. To learn more about Legal Karma's mission, visit us at legalkarma.org/foundation. Now let's jump in. Okay, welcome everyone. I am joined today by Colin Levy. Colin is the Director of Marketing and Biz Dev at WordRake and a former corporate lawyer himself. And we're going to be discussing legal technology's role in access to justice. Plus, Colin is a total thought leader in our space and someone that I have had a sincere joy to get to know and call a friend. Colin, hello, welcome. Why don't you just quickly please introduce yourself a bit and tell us a little more about your great work?
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here. And like you said, I consider you a friend, and it's been a great connecting with you. My background, I worked for a paralegal prior to law school in New York, did e-discovery work primarily, creating e-discovery databases. And then I went to law school and I graduated from law school, and it took me about a year and a half to find my first full-time role because I graduated into what then was a bad legal market. In some ways like this one, but not as bad, I would say. And part of the reason for the delay was I always wanted to work in-house. I never wanted to work for a firm. So I've worked for a whole bunch of different companies, from a startup to a global manufacturer to a couple tech companies, including one as sole in-house counsel. And really, through that experience, I started writing about what I was learning on the job. And I also saw how little tech was used in the context of the work that I was doing and thought, this isn't right. Other industries are using technology in far more innovative ways and benefiting from the use of it and looking at it as just another tool in the toolbox. So I wanted to learn more about it. And that started off on my journey of learning about legal tech, talking to people involved in the field, and writing about it. Now, I can't get enough of it, and I can't help but try to get others feel the same passion that I do about it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, actually. I didn't know that about you, but given the fact, I always thought that you were, really interested in legal tech, and that's not most attorneys, and you seem to know a lot about it, and you're really drawn to it. But now it makes a lot of sense knowing that you have actually worked in under other industries that leverage technology, and this is not what most lawyers do. Most lawyers go to law school and then jump right into a law firm, and they don't actually have any experience outside of working at a law firm. And I think that's kind of the culture that's passed down from the older lawyers to the mid-level lawyers to the new lawyers. Is just we bill on the hour. This is how we do it. Because you learn so much about how to operate a business by working in the business. And so if the people who have always worked in the business have always operated in the same way on this old model, there's not a lot of change going on there. So I didn't know that about you. That makes a lot of sense. So is it fair to say that you're a lawyer now gone techie? Because now you work at WordRake. What is WordRake?
Sure. So I think it's fair to say that I still consider myself a lawyer, but also I would say definitely turning tech and involved in tech and passionate about it. So WordRake is a really interesting company. They make a tool that is an add-on for Word that automates the editing of documents. And it also works for Outlook as well, so it works on emails. And I had used the tool for quite some time because I write a lot and I don't like to edit. Plus, I'm not particularly always great at editing my own work. And so this tool does a great job of basically redlining my documents and making them more concise, more polished, and making better use of words and removing kind of unnecessary words and verbosity from documents. And so, I joined the company because since I already used the tool, it made sense for me to continue talking about it, perhaps in a more professional way, given that I'm such a fan and it's come in handy for me for such a long time.
Hmm. Well, sounds like they're lucky to have you there. So, um, well, let's talk about access to justice. So, I would actually like to hear from you. What does access to justice mean to you?
Well, I'm definitely not I would say the go-to expert in this space, but it is one that I think is very important for me and for others to know about. And the way I would look at access to justice is it's really a means of making the legal system and the resources within the legal industry more accessible to everyday people, because oftentimes what happens is the legal system, at least in the US, can be very confusing, can be very complex, and also can be very costly. So, really, what access to justice overall is aimed at is reducing the barriers to entry to accessing legal resources, making resources less costly, more available, and also just simply reducing the cost of providing those services. Because everyday people oftentimes don't even have a lot of time to have to do the research required or develop the knowledge required as to knowing where to look or who to turn to for help. And so, really, there's been this movement, partially instigated by technology, to make the legal system more accessible in every way to people who are most in need of legal help.
So, one thing I wanted to dig into here, I always hear access to justice used, and then there's also access to legal services. And all of the statistics that we always hear, like 80% of Americans can't get access to legal services. But when I hear access to justice and see access to justice centric technology companies, they always seem to be kind of oriented around, criminal law, and access to our issues with our court system and issues with the prison system. I think not all of them, but I think commonly, yes. Um, so is there a difference? Is access to justice and access to legal services, is there a line there? Or by your point there is, someone who has less financial privilege, their ability to form an LLC and get the documents that they need to be a business owner, is this kind of the same?
So that's a really interesting question. The way I would answer it is that I think access to justice is most commonly thought of in the criminal context. So, in terms of the court system, criminal law, that sort of thing. But the way I look at it is, I really think it's an overall movement to just make the legal system and legal resources more accessible to everyone, and that can be criminal law. That also can be corporate law as well. I think it's more commonly focused on criminal law because often the people most in need of legal services need help with sort of some criminal matter as opposed to something else. So that's perhaps what drives some of the focus that seems to exist, which is, as far as I'm concerned, just and definitely needed. Because, hiring a lawyer, lawyers are expensive historically. Finding the right one for you is often tough because it's hard to kind of know quality in a lawyer. And also finding judicial resources is hard because a lot of the way that those resources have been presented in the past has been in complex ways and in ways designed for lawyers and not designed for everyday people. And there's also a lot, I think, of complexity involved in the legal system that makes it hard to kind of just learn about, because there's a lot of terms and there are a lot of rules that aren't very easily accessed or learned about. And I think the access to justice movement really is about just trying to kind of reduce the amount of work that's required to access judicial resources, and also, quite frankly, to help people help themselves through resources and through the provision of free resources that can help, without having to pay anyone for something. Because oftentimes, people may not necessarily have a whole lot of money to spend on a legal matter, or in some cases, just literally just can't afford to, because the amount that it would cost sort of through a more traditional route is just, astronomical in some cases.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And In your opinion, I'm curious, how did we get here? Like, how is there, the legal industry is a whopping $70 billion industry. And I actually am quoting that number from a 2019 survey. I'm sure it has grown. How is a $70 billion industry having issues serving 80% of clients who have legal issues?
So I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that most of I would say the profit from legal work comes from working with corporate clients,
Mm.
whether in on the litigation front or on the corporate front. And often these are long-term engagements. So there's that piece of it. I think the other piece of it is that the billable hour is a very lucrative financial model for lawyers, and it has accommodated sort of this long-standing view by many lawyers that you know doing legal work is unpredictable. Every matter is different. There's no way of kind of knowing how much it's going to cost to do this versus this. When in many cases, that's not always the case.
Right.
And I also think that with regards to you know serving people most in need is everyone needs to make a living, and I think everyone is entitled to make a living. But the problem is often it is um, a sacrifice, not just for the client, but also for the legal professional to help someone because they require a lot of help, and that help often is costly, not just because of the lawyer's own costs, but because of other costs associated with dealing with that matter. So there is that issue as well, and certainly I think providing ways to make it more appealing, I would say, for certain lawyers or legal professionals to do that type of work is much needed. And it saddens me to have to say that because you would think that people are just entitled to help, and I certainly think that, but at the same time, it certainly is. Um, some of these matters are often complex, more complex than the client even realizes, and that then entails a lot of time and a lot of effort on the part of the lawyer. So there's a lot of different elements to be addressed, I think, within this
Mhm.
space.
Yes, I agree. But okay, but something that still puzzles me is we're in a capitalist society. So someone who is savvy enough should be able to come along and change and disrupt this. Why do you think that hasn't happened yet? I mean, we've gone pretty far into not being able to serve the majority of Americans. Everybody knows this is an issue, and everybody who's not a lawyer broadly agrees that, I mean, there's some common stereotypes out there about working with lawyers that we don't need to name here, but I think everybody knows what they are. So how has someone not come along and change this? What is the blocker there?
So I think I would push back a little bit and say that I think there's been some efforts made to help with this in terms of automating the intake of documents, automating the creation of documents that then have lowered costs, um, allowing for people to create their own documents that they then can need for their own legal purposes. But part of the issue also, I think, comes from, quite frankly, the lack of education about just how the legal system works and how to navigate it and where to look for things. I think that there's been efforts made at creating tools that are self-help tools for people, but I think there hasn't been as much effort focused on educating those people about exactly what they need to be looking for, what they need, and how to complete them. And that, I think, is an area that definitely is ripe. But I think perhaps part of the reason for why that's been not addressed so far has been perhaps a lack of incentives, or also, quite frankly, I think just not enough effort towards that
Yeah.
type of thing. Which is not to say there haven't been efforts made. There certainly have been, but I think oftentimes, certainly within the legal tech world, which still is relatively small compared to the rest of the industry, doesn't often get as much attention as other areas, and that I think needs to change.
Yeah, that checks out. I think you're right. I think it's a lack of incentive and education, and then also a lack of permission. When I look at the people who I think are doing it well, I think there's some popular names. There's LegalZoom. I think they've really served up an accessible way for people who can't afford business services to get them very quickly. Legal Shield comes to mind, a subscription service. Um, Trademark Engine, Hello Divorce. So I think it's these people who are automating and productizing fulfillment and intake. But then there's also this issue of permission and UPL, because these tech companies can't do it. I mean, I think that in the moment that LegalZoom opens up a law firm, that is going to be the actual incentive. That's push coming to shove for these other firms, because once these giant tech companies who have the software to back them up and provide competitive services, they're going to really, I think the word is incentivize. Like lawyers are going to be greatly incentivized then to educate themselves and make changes, because their money is going to be challenged. They're going to start losing market share. Um, what do you think
Yeah.
about that? Do you agree, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a really good point that the other issue is, quite frankly, just the regulation of lawyers
Yeah,
that I think has been outdated and overly restrictive for some time, and has, I think, reinforced the perception of lawyers as being part of a guild that only lawyers can be a part of, and no one else can be a part of or should be a part of. And so I think by restricting those who can operate firms and the ways in which firms can be operated, has certainly, I think, been a huge impediment towards making legal services more accessible, and in disseminating information with regards to legal services as well. And I think we've seen in states like Arizona that have, in Utah, that have relaxed some of the rules or introduced sandboxes, that there definitely is, I would say, a growing movement to try out sort of a re-regulation, I would say. But if you ask me, I think it's probably not moving fast enough for my liking,
yeah,
given the amount of need that exists out there.
yeah. I agree. I had a moment to catch up with Justice Ann Timmer about this. She was on our podcast back in January, right when it went live, and she headed up the task force that finally pushed it across the finish line. Um, and I was interested. Her rationale was all about the overwhelmed court systems. There are too many, citizens representing themselves pro se, and they can't afford a lawyer. They know they can't, so they don't even try. And then they're going in front of these judges, and judges are having to consult people on legal matters, which they cannot do. And so there's a backlogged, overwhelmed court in Arizona. And I think that was the first push that came to shove, is we can't manage this anymore. And there's no affordable services. So they're going to have to turn to something that makes it so.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many issues raised by I think the kind of access to justice movement overall, and the backlog of cases, people representing themselves pro se because they can't afford a lawyer or don't know that they need one. Um, it's really just, to me, it's also, I think, saddening and disheartening to realize how lucky most of us are in terms of what we are able to do, and what we know, and not having to be faced with a lot of these issues, and also the fact that we have a country that has a very robust legal system, but nevertheless a system that seems to not treat everyone equally, and that's a larger issue, perhaps reserved for another conversation. But it's definitely, I think, a part of um, the larger access to justice area that needs attention. And it's just, there are a lot of issues, and the problem is there are a lot of misaligned incentives, and there's a lot to, I think, kind of tackle, and you can't really tackle them all at once. You kind of have to kind of pick and choose your battles and appreciate the small victories, even though there's a recognition that there are a lot more battles to come that need to be fought.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that I've learned by doing this podcast and talking to a lot of smart people like you is something that's come up more than once, is pro bono work is not going to be enough. Like, we have to find a way to make subscription models or unbundled services or productized services, whatever lingo you want to call it. We have to find a way to incentivize lawyers to do these models and to know that they can make more profits. Um, Off of these models, they can be just as profitable, if not more, than a billable hour model. Because truly, to me, from a as a business owner and techie entrepreneur, whatever, the billable hour model is broken because there's a limited amount of hours that you can bill for. Like one person can only work so many hours a day, but productized services that are done through technology can scale infinitely. It doesn't matter how many people go through the piece of technology.
Right. I think that's a fair point, but I think I also would say that the billable hour model, well, yes, one's number of hours during a day are limited, but nevertheless, the model allows for billing for all sorts of different things, and even perhaps if you're not necessarily working per se, but something's being done on your behalf, you can, there are times in which you can bill for that. And another part too is, the bill bar model is financially very lucrative for firms, and they've done well with it. And I think there remains a great deal of clients who may not necessarily love the model, but nevertheless are okay with it, partly due to the fact that they've had long-standing relationships with a lot of these firms and don't want to disrupt that relationship because these firms now at this point know a lot about this particular business or company. And the lawyer has become not just their lawyer, but a friend. So I think there's also that element as well that plays into it. And the other thing too, I think, is that there are a lot of behaviors that have long been incentivized by the bill per hour model that will be, I think, hard to just sort of shift overnight as well. So there's cultural change that needs to happen as well, not just a change in terms of the financial model.
What are some of those behaviors?
Well, I think some of them include, a feeling that you have to work long hours to meet your billable hour target. The need to just constantly be inputting hours into a timesheet. The desire to kind of hoard work and hoard knowledge because you want to be billing for those and you don't want to have someone else taking away hours that you could be billing for. Those are some of the, I think, the incentives and behaviors that are not great. Not to mention, of course, the long-standing mental health issues that have long plagued the industry that involve again, working long hours, long nights, pressure to succeed, contrived competition, and this kind of really harsh, I would say, self-evaluation that a lot of lawyers have of themselves in terms of failure is not an option and always need to be perfect. And I think that those issues as well are in some ways incentivized by that model.
Yes.
And also in law school too, for that matter.
Yes, absolutely. I think that getting into law firms and giving them more business coaching on the different ways that they can bill will be a big part of that change. Also, it's important to note that we're talking about a spectrum and it's not either or. I think there's a large slice of the pie that will not ever deviate from the billable hour. And I think you've made a good point. Like there's relationships who can't afford it. They've been doing it for years. They know their lawyers know them. They're part of the business at this point. They're not, a line item, like they are a critical piece. But then there's also a lot of new, smaller, emerging firms that are having a lot of issue, finding clients that can pay those rates. And I think that's the other 80% of Americans that are out there. It's not like those 80% of Americans just don't have cash. It's that they don't have $5,000 in, for this, $2,000 for that, plus an unknown amount of $250 an hour or $650 or whatever this lawyer wants to charge. There are people out there that have cash who don't necessarily need that white glove service, who don't need someone who's always there. They just need some documents made and they need someone who can answer their questions.
Right.
That's a huge part of the market too. And I think that's where, and I think the truth is there's not actually been a piece of technology that enables those kind of lawyers to sell in that way. For whatever reason, it hasn't been really built yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple points I would make about that. One is I think there certainly are, not every legal task has to be a bespoke legal task and is completely unique. Creating a certain type of document, whether it's a pleading or a type of contract or a type of will or what have you, is not, you don't have to reinvent the wheel to create that. So there's no reason to have to charge an arm or a leg to do that type of work when there are plenty of tools to help with that. So there's that. The other part of it is, I think there are tools that allow for There are plenty of tools that allow for the automation of document creation, but I think there still are plenty of lawyers who kind of worry about making sure it's done exactly right, and this desire to kind of have control for every part of the process. And I think there are plenty of clients who, quite frankly, just need something quick and dirty done and don't necessarily need something that is, absolutely perfect. They just need something that gets the job done and gets them closer to where they need to be. Which is not to say that lawyers should half-ass that. They shouldn't at all. But at the same time, there's no need to kind of keep looking at something when the client's happy with it. If the client's happy with it, you know, stop there. And if they need more help, let them ask you for help. I think it's really important to be sort of client driven as opposed to lawyer driven.
Mhm. So what is what's the low-hanging fruit here? Like, in your opinion, looking at the landscape today, what do you think the like number one thing lawyers everywhere could do to make a difference?
So I would say that the one thing that lawyers can do to make a difference that I don't think really costs them anything is to just simply be better engaged and collaborative with their clients and be more informative and help educate their clients and listen to their clients to educate them as well. So it goes both ways. Let the client educate you about their business, about their issues, really listen and listen and don't talk and let the client kind of explain their situation. And at the same time, provide opportunities to collaborate and work together, not just kind of have it be a one-way street where the client asks the lawyer for something, the lawyer provides something back, and kind of that's the way it works. No, I really think it's important for lawyers to take more of a business partner perspective with regards to them working with clients and really work together with the client to achieve a goal as opposed to kind of just doing things as asked, but really take the time to build that relationship and move it forward. And that's something I think often gets overlooked by many.
Nice. So the same question again, but from the technology perspective. So that's kind of a hypothetical piece of advice for anybody, or a philosophy piece of advice for a lawyer. What about tech? What's the number one thing? If this is a podcast episode on tech is a missing piece for access to justice, and we're not talking about pro bono here. Like, what can lawyers at firms who are going to charge their clients money, how can we tap in there? Because to me, that's the real tricky piece. When we figure that out as the United States, I think that is where we're going to see the needle really move in increasing access. So what's the one thing from a technology piece that lawyers can do?
So I'd say there's two. Sorry, I'm going to take your question and tweak it just a tad and give you two things. One, I think, is make better use of existing tools that they have. So whether it's Word or Excel or what have you, there are a lot of, you may not love Word, but Word has a boatload of functionality in it. You just probably aren't making the best use of it, including some things that can help automate what you do, including use of macros where you kind of record a common action, and then with a keystroke, you can just have that action be done, whether it's inserting text in a document or what have you. And then the other part of it, I would say, and the other sort of low-hanging fruit, I would say, within sort of tech is that's growing is something I mentioned before, which is the automation of document creation, because documents are the bread and butter of a lot of legal services, and the more you can automate a lot of that, the more accessible you can make those services, and the cheaper you can provide them.
I have something provocative that I say that I don't know exactly how it's received, but I think it's still true, and that is, I think that documents are totally automatable, which means document drafting from an attorney, unless it's strategic, if it's common document drafting, is completely automatable, which means it's only worth an attorney's review, which means it's practically worthless. And I think that once the mindset goes there, I think that's when access to justice is different, because I think the truth is that most of these documents, lawyers have had them for years and they barely tweak them, and they just open them up, and maybe some of them have highlighted spots where they just change things or whatever it might be. But for some reason, they think that they should be able to charge $1,000 to $2,000 for these very simple tasks. And I think that is artificial value, it's that artificial value that has led to this access to justice issue. So you don't have to agree with that. That is my personal. That's where I'm putting the flag in the ground and saying, nope, this is the hill I'll die on. I think that is, I believe that sincerely, and that's not to say that lawyers will never be automated, and they have a place where they do strategic work that matters and is important, and quite frankly what they went to school for and the work that they really want to be doing. But I think overcharging people for very simple turnkey tasks is the issue.
Yeah, I would say in response, I definitely think overcharging is an issue, and trying to reinvent the wheel when you don't need to. And yeah, your standard run-of-the-mill documents are definitely automatable, and I don't think that there should be a question about that. I do think that if you are a lawyer and you're worried about tech coming for your job, then you probably will want to be looking at what exactly you're doing for your job. Because if those are tasks that can all be done by tech, then you have a right to be afraid. But you also should be asking yourself, why is this my job when tech can do it? You should be asking, what strategic value can I add and what strategic tasks can I be doing?
Nice. I think a lot of lawyers are afraid of that. They're afraid of robot lawyer coming to take their job. That is a real fear. Um, and should be. I mean, to me, that is capitalism finally knocking on the door to disrupt the legal industry. And it's been so shielded for so long. But the fact that they haven't been afraid of that in 2021, that it's just kind of, we're just now starting to really get the full attention. The fact that this should have happened in 2002, like, well, this should have happened a long time ago, but it hasn't, and it's amazing, and it's coming. So
The industry is just, it's been very insular for a long time. It's been very protectionist, and it's used both of those attributes to its full advantage, I would say, for quite some time, which in part explains why it's been slow to change, and why some of these issues that have been talked about for a long time remain issues to this day.
mm. Well, I have one last question for you, Colin, and then I'd like to open it up to you if you'd like to ask or add anything on. And I think it's just less a question about values or what people think is right or wrong. It's more of a question on consequences. So what do you think the consequences are for the legal industry just refusing to continue to refuse to adapt to technology? Like, if we just continue to say, screw it, no, that's not what we're going to do. We're going to stick with this one thing. What's a consequence of that?
The consequence of not acting is that technology is gonna eventually catch up. So technology is not waiting for the legal industry to catch up to it. Technology is continuing to advance and continuing to uh, do tasks that have been done before in the past by lawyers. So, whether lawyers want to change or not, I think is irrelevant in the area of technology, because technology is going to continue to push forward. So my suggestion, to the legal industry and to lawyers is, either get with the program or get left behind.
Cool. Is there anything else you'd like to add or share or say? We've talked about a lot today, and there's still a lot more we could talk about. But
Well, I mean, there's, this conversation could go on for quite some time. What I would just say, is if anyone, is fearful of technology and wants help to overcome that fear, I'm more than happy to help reach out and connect. I encourage folks to reach out if they want to learn more. And also, I should just mention my blog, where I interview a lot of leaders in the legal tech and innovation space, colinslevy.com. And if they want to check that out, please go ahead and do so, because I am privileged and lucky enough to have talked with a lot of folks who I think are very well deserving of their tireless efforts to help improve the legal industry and a lot of and work on a lot of the issues that we talked about so far.
Wonderful. Colin, if folks do want to connect with you or talk to you, you've got a LinkedIn, Colin Levy, that's going to be on this post here. But is there anywhere else they can go? You said their website. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm on, LinkedIn website that I mentioned, again, colinslevy.com. I'm also on Twitter. My handle is at @clevy_law. And those are the best places to reach out if they would like to connect with me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. This has been an awesome conversation.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
If you're a first-time listener here, welcome. We're delighted that you tuned in. If you'd like to learn more about Legal Karma's products or foundation, please visit us at legalkarma.org. And if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast and share more about your great work, you can always reach me at Corey, that's Kory, Corey, at legalkarma.org. Thanks for tuning in, folks.